Symbolic History Through Sight and Sound, 12 Ars Nova, 14th century. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alph the sacred river ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. Coleridge's road to Xanadu led from purchased pilgrimage through the green and fountainous wilderness of Bartram's Florida. But the actual journey to the Khan's summer palace at Shandu, north of Peking, was described by Marco Polo, with other marvels of the opulent East, tales for which the Venetians of 1300 called him Marco Milione, fable monger. The architecture of that China has largely perished, but pictures from the 9th century down display a space and atmosphere unparalleled in Dark Age Europe. Europe, shortly to transform the world, juts from the landmass of Asia and Africa, linked by racial migrations even to America, like the eye of a potato. And through the Dark Ages, as in this forest outpost of the Byzantine, a small 9th century church near Oviedo, in the rim of Spain not quite conquered by the Moors, the geographical disproportion might equally have applied to the culture. Over how much of the globe were those the centuries of great temple-building civilizations? In Mexico, the forest and upland cities, whose offshoots would astonish Spanish conquerors even after 600 years, when Europe had peaked to the Renaissance. Here one of many pyramids at El Tajín, north of Veracruz. And all over Asia, religious houses, monasteries, and abbeys with gilded idols, as Marco Polo says, in masterly style. This from 8th century Japan, rebuilt about 1700 after a fire. The great Buddha Hall of Todaiji, a transplant from Tang, China, like the silk painting and poetry, or the music of the bamboo flute. From China, about the 9th century, Kuan Yin leading a soul toward paradise. From Japan, 13th, the mystical descent of Amida. In the then Buddhist center of India, the Mukteswara temple at Bhubaneswar, with ritual music preserved in Tibet. From the jungles of Cambodia, where the kingdom of the Khmers rose toward the 12th century climax of Angkor. Or the power of Islam, spread at its height from the Indus through Spain, with its centuries of Moslem and Jewish law, Avicenna on geology, precursing Leonardo by 500 years. Mountains may be due to two different causes. Either they result from upheavals of the earth's crust, such as might occur in violent earthquake, or they are the effect of water, which, cutting for itself a new route, has denuded the valleys. An argument still pursued in Goethe's Faust. How these world glories overshadow all Christian Europe could vault in its time of troubles.
Incipit lamentatio, Jeremie profeti. Alleluia.
The followers of Charlemagne barely holding out against Moors, Vikings, Magyars. Here an interior of another 9th century church of Asturian Spain, with the Mozarabic chant, which, as revived, can hardly be distinguished from Gregorian. Who could have guessed the germinal force of that backward landmass, that potator's eye? Yet from the First Crusade, the earliest reaching of Romanesque toward Gothic, the scale is tipped.
On t'y avance pour Maria, son Christ de meurtri.
Through the enamel flattening of a tomb plaque in Le Mans, Geoffrey Plantagenet draws the sword of redeemed heraldic self, the fleur-de-lis, the rampant lion, keen as the trouvère cry of his grandson, Richard Coeur de Lion, from his Dürrenstein captivity. The earth assertion is bolder by the Italy of Dante's youth. Here, from his Valley of Princes, Colui del Maschio Naso, Charles of Anjou, carved 1277 by Arnolfo di Cambio, architect of the Cathedral of Florence. So from the close of Dante's De Monarchia. Twofold are the ends which unerring providence has ordained for man, the bliss of this life, typified by the earthly paradise, and the bliss of life eternal. And since none or very few can reach temporal happiness unless mankind enjoys the tranquility of peace, this must be the constant aim of him who guides the globe, and whom we call the Roman Prince, in order that, on this thrashing floor, mortals may exist free and in peace. As if the travels of Marco Polo had set the half-barbaric but exploratory West, already individual, outward, utopian. Against the continuance of an Eastern, passive, meditational way, its roots coeval with the soul search of the Greek and Alexandrian, the Tao Te Ching. The way that can be told of is not an unvarying way. All things, however they flourish, return to the root from which they grew. This return to the root is called quietness. Quietness is called submission to fate. Only one who rids himself of desire sees the essences. The 10,000 things are born of being, but being itself is born of not being. Therefore the sage arrives without going, sees all without looking, does nothing, yet achieves everything. The West, as if created to revolutionize that Oriental transmission of quietist dream, down to the Victorian blatancy of Tennyson's claim, better 50 years of Europe than a cycle of Cathay. In all history, two cities stand out as transformational, Athens and Florence, and while no maker can be isolated in such an interplay, Florentine Dante, of this alleged death mask, comes as close as any to world center. Thus the next century saw him, by the domed and towered town, guide to the eternal realms, hell, purgatory, the starry spheres, which his art has humanized, mediating the incarnate birth, everywhere nascent in Gothic Christianity, a birth which reached at once toward Reformation and Renaissance. The North was no less roused. Roger Bacon, 1271, like the prophets of Strasbourg. More sins reign in these days than in any past age. The Holy See is torn by deceit and fraud. The new orders, horribly decayed, follow lechery, gluttony, pride. Princes, barons, knights oppress one another and the people with wars and exactions. The people more debased than tongue can tell. The ancient philosophers, though without quickening grace, lived incomparably better than we. Among the wise there is no doubt but that the church must be purged. Yet that lean monastic reproof swells in the Divine Comedy to such deliberate might as Giovanni Pisano gave the prophets of the Pisa pulpit left, or the Pistoia inscription. Giovanni carved it, who does no empty works, born of Nicola, but blessed with greater science. Him Pisa bred, and gave knowledge over things of sight. While Dante's Peter flames against his church, rapacious wolves dressed in the robes of shepherds are seen from here in all the Christian pastures. Avenging wrath of God, how long, how long? No wonder the opening prophecy of a saving greyhound, Veltro, V and U interchangeable, would seem a Lutheran anagram, Lutero. And as Pisano's gesture of assertion points over 300 years to Bernini's conscious Baroque right, so Dante's St. Peter has only to widen the bellows and open the stops of Milton's Claudia organ to become in Lycidas that pilot of the Galilean lake. He shook his mitred locks and stern bespake, "How well could I have spared for thee, young swain, anew of such as for their bellies' sake creep and intrude and climb into the fold, blind mouths." In Dante's Ulysses, recovery of the antique seeds the future, and of our oars made wings for the mad flight. So Giovanni Pisano's Temperance Rite remakes the classical Venus de Medici left. Instead of looking in the same direction as her body and thus affirming her existence in the present, Kenneth Clark writes in his book on the nude, she turns and looks upward over her shoulder toward the promised world of the future. Clark does not pursue how that sowing of negation raises a body of actual flesh and blood, energized by the unfolding of Christian paradox. As in Weber and Tawney, Christendom hosts the capitalism it condemns. It is somehow the hallmark of the Divine Comedy to give life glory to what is theologically disclaimed. Paolo and Francesca lashed on the dark wind, compelling as Giovanni Pisano's Sibyl. When we read how the desired smile was kissed by such a lover, quando leggemmo il desiato riso esser baciato da cotanto amante, this one who will never be parted from me kissed my mouth all trembling, la bocca mi baciò tutto tremante. The book became our go-between. That day we read in it no further. Quel giorno più non vi leggemmo avante. When the blood of the North, northern poetry and dance, the chivalric castle, here Richard Coeur de Lion's Chateau Gaillard over the Seine. Respond to the stimulus of Italy, Roman, Byzantine, Moorish. They take the heightened talk of conscious mind and person. The Castel del Monte, built for Frederick II 50 years later in Apulia, a pride like that to which Dante compares the giants who rim the pit of lowest hell and whom Jove still threatens when he thunders. Even the musical dance in the Italian Lament of Tristan, 14th century, draws its passions to the formal contrast of supertonic against tonic phrase. The French 13th century dance has not a shadow of that consciousness. So too with plot. In the old French romance of the palfrey, the timeless is hardly stretched by human will. The knight does not scheme to get the rich vavasour's daughter, nor she to avoid the knight's uncle, her father's choice. It is the vavasour who requests the knight's horse to bear his daughter. In self-sacrifice, the knight accedes. Moonrise misleads the bridal party. The horse, with the will and guidance of God, brings the girl through dreamlike forests to the castle of her love. In that plot, nothing is plotted. A century later, in Boccaccio's Falcon, also of a wealthy woman and a poor man, stellar chance admits the tug of will. Federico wills to sacrifice his falcon to his love. Madame Giovanna wills to marry him for his act. Such aesthetic form shaping assimilates the pastorelle of 13th century France to the Italy of the sweet new style. The French poem has the naive charm of the shepherd of the old choir screen at Chartres, left. Riding out the other day from St. Quentin to Cambrai, I saw a shepherdess who stood in a wood, her colour like the rose in May, who sang, I have a true love, deft and gay, though I am dark of hue. En un Dieu, j'ai belle amie, quinte jolie, ton sois-je, brunette. When Dante's friend Cavalcanti seized on the form, in un boschetto trovai pastorella, in a small wood I found a shepherdess. Its passion sets a torch to the earth denials where it burns. She drew me on to a cool, leafy place, where I gat sight of every coloured blossom, and there I drank in so much summer sweetness, it seemed love's God connived at its completeness. Menommi sotto una freschetta foglia, là dove io vidi fior d'ogni colore, e tanto vi sentio gioia e dolzore, che Dio d'amor mi par vivi vedere. Such arts of the profane have not survived, though flesh makes a related plea right in the smiling translucence of Giovanni Pisano. Wherever the Gothic flame strikes, it kindles in the timeless a revelational realism. Thus Arnolfo di Cambio's Old Woman from a Fountain, unforgettable as Dante's swollen counterfeiter in the fever of dropsical thirst. You who pass by, pity the grief of Master Adam. I had what I desired in life. Now I crave a single drop of water. Always with me are the little streams that down their cool rills murmur to the Arno from the green summits of the Casentine, and parch me worse in memory than this fever. In the polytonal modulations of Giovanni da Cascia, music about 1320, time of Giotto, explores such descriptive intensities. Here the setting of a single word for gloomy thickets, cupi, thick as Dante's wood of suicides in the Inferno. Non fronde verde, ma di color fosco, non rami schietti, ma nodosi e involti, non pomi veran, ma stecchi con tosco. As these chords stretch a residually bare fifth structure, the art of Giotto and his followers reaches for the basis of its earthly claim. Cennini's advice almost a century after this Giotto St. Francis, how to paint a mountain, set up a jagged rock in the studio and paint it large, reminds us that the very seeing of objects was suspended in the nominal. Mountain is rock. Could Giotto's eyes have shown him the Augustan temple in the square of Assisi as slim and weightless as he has painted it, though he could walk every day under its actual brooding mass? How great, then, the recovery which Renaissance required. So with Dante's explanation of spots on the moon, where he invokes the strangest experiment with mirrors to dismiss material cause in favor of an immediate and occult operation of God's virtue. Or Giotto's startling naturalism, the Greccio cross suspended against the sky, made surreal by the tensionless ring, placed not where it should be, but where it will show on the back side of the pole. Everywhere causal imagination lays hold of a world shrouded in faith acceptance. Why did they run out of wine at the Feast of Cana? Giotto's glutton answer, right, is as naively comic as Dante's Ciacco in Hell, or Belacqua dawdling and joking on the slopes of Purgatory. On the other hand, at the joyful meeting of Joachim and Anna before the Golden Gate of Jerusalem, it is from symbolic trans-reality that the hooded, dark figure of Sibylline prophecy interrupts a delight from which Mary, with the sword that pierced her heart, would spring. Here, as in the pocket tragedies of Dante, a realism of Gothic suspension, what we can only call symbolic realism, drives a temporal wedge into the eternal kingdoms. The projection of person into creed, which marks these Christ heads from Giotto's Padua Chapel, left from the hypnotic raising of Lazarus, far right, lashing the money changers out of the temple, center, the mystic removal from accusing Caiaphas, thou hast said. No less attends Dante's passage through an eternal place, his fury on the wrathful Styx. I saw him so fanged by the muddy people that still I thank and praise God for it. His pity for the noble damned. Are you here? Siete voi qui, Ser Brunetto? Up to the smiling peace of Picarda, lost and found in la sua voluntade nostra pace. In two treatments of the raising of Lazarus, that heightening of drama looms, as in recorded masses our solemn droned incipits break to polyphony. Here the Tournai Creed.
Credo in unum Deum.
On the left, the scene from the catacombs of St. Calixtus, 3rd century, dissolves classical outwardness in gospel mystery. If it were not so, I would have told you. But Giotto's Padua fresco, from which we have just detailed Christ's summoning face in its bold grappling with the scripture, Lord, by this time he stinks, matches Dante's most startling encounters, Buon Conte da Montefeltro in Purgatory. L'angel di Dio mi prese, God's angel took me, and a spirit of hell cried, You of heaven, with right do you rob me? You take this shadow to eternal weal for one small tear that defends him from me, but on his hulk I will work otherwise. So the charged sky, loosing floods, sweeps the corpse down the Arno. In this pair, the Kells' Temptation of Christ, about 800 left, offers a first emergence of drama from the Dark Age symbolic and calligraphic. Yet how could this cockroach Satan, this bodiless lord of flies, stage a real temptation? If we leap from that over 500 years, the temptation from Duccio's Maesta right penetrates Sienese Byzantine about 1305 with the already advancing spearhead of Giotto. Here the allegorical kingdoms of this world begin to spread themselves before the dramatic precursor of Milton's conscious Messiah. How truly Vasari saw Giotto as the turning point from Byzantine to the new nature and humanity. From the apse mosaic of Salerno Cathedral left, we sample what he calls that gross and incompetent age inherited from the Greek and Roman fall. The great artists having died out, the few Greeks who survived, belonging to the old but not to the ancient world, could only trace outlines on a ground of color. Over and over again they produced figures in the same style, standing on tiptoe and staring as if possessed, as can be seen in every old church in all the cities of Italy. On the right, Giotto's bridal procession of the Virgin, in its melodious dignity of space, renews the wonder of Vasari's praise. And it was indeed miraculous that in those days Giotto could paint with such sublime grace, especially when we consider that he learned his art, so to speak, without any instructor. Though there is a liability in separating Gothic observation from the old God-possession of supernatural forms, Giotto's miracle is his harmonization of the sacred, his deification of earth's beauty.